Great. I think we'll get started. So here we are today, the third episode of the Tag Talk show, which is sponsored by Tagmate, and Tagmate is a product by Tatvik Analytics, a Google marketing platform agency partner based out of India. So today's episode is on cookieless future, first-party data strategy, and server-side tagging. I know that's a lot of terms that are put in one slide on one deck, but don't worry, we have experts, seasoned experts, GAGTM experts. They're the CEOs of their own agencies, and they have done a variety of implementations from small businesses to enterprise clients. Josh and Brandie, and your host Bismay. I lead the product team at Tatvik. Thank you, audience, for joining us from across the globe. I know it's a different time zones across the globe, but we promise you that this will be as eventful and as educative like our previous episodes has been, so that when you go back home, or rather, when you shut down your PC tonight or today, you will have lots of stuff to understand, process, and then maybe take action at the end of the day. Great. Thank you, Josh and Brandie, as well, for your time and for joining us. I can see a lot of our Tagmate fan base have joined us again. So thank you for trusting us. Thank you for the opportunity, and we will definitely help you with more of this episodes as we go along for education and awareness about the MarTech ecosystem. Right. Today's agenda, we'll keep it a slot of about 45 minutes, where we'll start with an intro on the speakers, and then there is the Q&A session, which I'll be kind of moderating. There's a quick one-slider on Tagmate, which is the product, and the preview of it. And then we'll end it with audience Q&A, and there will be a poll as well, with certain closing thoughts from our speakers. Here we are for the speaker's introduction. So I welcome Brandie. He is the CEO of MarTech Monarch, which is an agency, and she is an experienced digital marketing and a data analyst evangelist, having worked with multiple clients like Orlando Health, TravelClick, etc. She is passionate about digital marketing strategy, web analytics, and social media. And you can look at her accomplishments on her website, on her LinkedIn. You can reach her at her LinkedIn, and her website is martechmonarch.com. Do check her website and the different types of services in the MarTech space that they provide. She is also in hashtag Women for Business. So she believes in giving back to the community with a deep passion for working with small businesses and startups. Thank you, Brandie, for joining us as well. Josh,
absolutely.
Hi. Yeah. Josh, hello, Josh. Josh brings over a decade of experience in analytics instrumentation, CRO, data architecture, and you name it. He's currently head of analytics as well as partner at From the Future agency. It's like a very eye-catchy name for an agency, From the Future, just like Back to the Future, the US Western movie that I liked. He used to run a great big digital agency, which is focused on SEO, media planning and buying, CRO, sales funnel design, and creatives, right? So a lot of performance marketing around under his belt and analytics. So he's the right digital evangelist for us, and one of our speakers for us today, where we'll be talking about first-party data and different strategies that agencies and clients or businesses should look at. He's also an enthusiastic songwriter. You can reach him at www.ftf.co, which is fromthefuture.co, and also his LinkedIn profile. Thank you, Josh, for joining us.
Of course.
Awesome. So let's get to the meat of today's webinar with the Q&A session with both our speakers. Before that, I just wanted to talk about a few stats on cookies. Yes, these are the cookies that everybody has been talking about. All advertisers, publishers, agencies, whoever is in the martech business, they are talking about, or any digital business for that matter, right? There's a study which Google did on 500 global publishers, and they found out that if there is a third-party cookie missing, which we are going to talk about in our Q&A session, publishers have been seen to lose an average of 52% of programmatic ad revenue. That's like 50% of what they are currently earning from the advertisers. And second, one another study by McKinsey, which says that what's the amount of this ad revenue in actual numbers? In US itself, it's about $10 billion. Like that's too big a number to ignore and move on, right? So there is necessary steps that needs to be taken if cookies, the third party cookies per se, are going away, like the from the Chrome browser per se, or which essentially iOS or your ITP, which is from the Apple side of things, that has already been removed. So with this stat, I just wanted to turn towards Josh and ask him, how big is this impact if this cookies are going away? Josh.
Yeah, thank you. The digital advertising industry, as we know it, has relied on third-party cookies for years, right? It's really built the foundation of how we do digital marketing and targeting beyond the web. So third-party cookies going away is humongous. It's really a significant change that will pave the pathway forward for advertising, digital marketing to come in the future. No one really knows what it's going to look like. We're going to talk about methodologies, to mitigate kind of the impact of third-party cookie loss in the future. But the conversation that we have now might look very different in a year, right? And the reason that Google keeps pushing back the timeline on when Chrome is going to deprecate third-party cookies is because, the conversation is still happening in terms of what does the landscape look like when this goes away. We could see, massive impact on cost per lead. We could see massive impact on, a loss in terms of the ability to target users effectively. So it really will change, significantly the landscape of how we do this moving forward. So it's going to be big. Whether there are really good solutions, which does reduce the impact, it's going to be a humongous change that everybody is going to be impacted by.
Right. I think, yes, like the number suggests $10 billion, I would expect that that's going to be quite huge. So, Brandie, you have been running an agency on your own, and would you like to share any customer experiences that that the customers have been facing or they have been dreading due to the cookie loss?
Yeah, outside of just the fear of the unknown, as I like to call it, it's really a weird time to be in the space with so many unknowns happening at the moment. I would say, as far as some immediate effects that we've noticed, like you might have things like cost per lead rising. If you're running ads on Facebook or Meta, you might see there's a loss in a lot of the metrics that you might have relied on in the past to gauge how your advertising is doing. There's also the probability that there will be more gaps in some of the analytics, and we're seeing a lot of platforms start to rely on artificial intelligence to fill in some of those gaps. So it just, as far as the accuracy of the tracking, we're seeing a decline in that that accuracy and just having to get clients used to having less of that one-to-one relationship with analytics. It's never really been one-to-one, but I think in our heads we like to tell ourselves that it's super accurate when we really should be doing trend analysis. But I see that shift now going more towards that trend analysis and looking for trends as opposed to that one-to-one relationship.
Right. Thanks for that. I think customers generally are at this point in time hunky dory about it, like whether they should look at it from a long-term point of view or a short-term point of view on how to kind of activate solutions. So, in terms of that, Josh, I wanted to point to the next question. Like, what are the short-term solutions that you would recommend your clients to take up?
So it's important to note that when we're talking about third-party cookies, it's heavily kind of targeted at Chrome, and because of over the last few years, many other browsers like Safari and Firefox have already kind of started not supporting third-party cookies. And the reason I bring that up is because some of these short-term solutions that we're going to be talking about have been around for a few years, right? They're like, for instance, server-side kind of endpoints with conversion API on Meta, and then we're going to see some, like Snap is already rolling out some server-side endpoints that you can push, first-party data to kind of, get around the third-party impact. Those have been around for a little while, so that is definitely one method that I would suggest is to, set up some kind of server-side solution, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Beyond that, it's really important to, start thinking about a consent management plan. So a cookie management or consent management where you're asking the users for their permission to interact and send their data to these different platforms. Because first-party data in the future is going to be kind of the future of, the impact of the loss of third-party cookies. The last one I will note is just creating some kind of, interactivity on the website itself to gather information, right? To start gathering your own first-party information, which will be really important to have that set up in the future so that you already have the backbone that when this happens, you've already started collecting some of this data on your own.
God, thanks, Josh, for that. So, a summary is like you're suggesting first server-side implementations for your marketing platforms. Second is first-party data collection mechanism, and the third one you said is about the interactions, making it more the consent management platform where you're able to collect first-party data from your users, and the third is making it more interactive so that the users are ready to share their first-party data for your advertising needs, right? As an advertiser. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Brandie, since you have worked with enterprise brands, what do you think from a strategic point of view, which Josh was mentioning about the solutions that they have, how should they act to solve for this over a long term?
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now is the time to definitely begin rethinking your marketing strategy, especially if things like retargeting, which is historically heavily reliant on third-party cookies, is a big part of your marketing strategy. It's definitely time to rethink that and go back to the drawing board as far as what is your marketing mix and what tactics are you using to reach your customers and re-engage your existing customers. I would say, of course, as Josh already pointed out, you definitely want to begin to start focusing on your first-party data collection and how you are leveraging that to push out your marketing efforts. If that means, that can mean different things for different companies. I would say a lot of enterprise brands are looking towards CDP if they don't already have one. And if that doesn't make sense for your business, there's still alternative things that you can do. But ultimately, it's a lot of it is going to boil down to having that first party data collection and having a plan on how to leverage that to engage your customers.
Awesome. That basically means like building a more secured first-party data warehousing or a customer data platform that you're suggesting, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, great. So, since we have been talking about third-party cookies and first-party cookies and first-party data, so Josh, what's the difference, or maybe you could just help us with what are these attributes that a first-party data, gets collected, and that an user gives consent for an advertiser to collect them from the website or the browser?
Yeah, I mean, so there's going to be some obvious ones like personal information, right? This is how, some of the advertisers are going to do matches and attribution in the future, right? We're already seeing that with Meta and with Google Ads, where it's, requesting that you send email, it's requesting that you send, phone number and address, right? So that it can essentially match that data back better, right? Because without third-party tracking, they have a really hard time getting that information off of the pixel, right? And so this, sending, actual personal information to these different platforms will help them kind of, continue to optimize to conversions that they're attributing back to the ad, right? So there's that type of data, but there's also, really important non-personal information that is first party, such as interests, right? And as you get, as a customer continues on your website and, builds their journey through your site, you can get more and more and more first party data by essentially asking people for it, right? One, you can ask them through quizzes and polls on your site, but additionally, beyond that, you can get some of that first party data by just, the pages on your site that they're going to and what they're actually interacting with, right? So there's a couple of different methods for that. And then finally, some kind of unique ID, because not every single platform is going to support personal information like Google Analytics 4 won't, which Brandie will talk about, but, some kind of unique identifier, whether that's a number or, some code or some letters, right, that you can essentially match to a customer, in something like GA4, in something that is their unique ID platform to platform. So we might see a lot of brands start building login systems and, accounts, because this is a way that they will be able to kind of track that, user all the way through on different devices.
Understood. And I think this first-party data sources cannot be from DMPs, right? DMPs will not be playing a part here. Am I correct?
At least now. So yeah, correct.
Okay, right. Yeah. So just to sum up, on the first-party data, why do we need actually first-party data collection, and why this is future-proof and scalable and consented? There is a Think with Google study in the digital marketing privacy playbook, which says that marketers who are using first-party data, they are able to generate 2 times the incremental revenue from an ad, from an ad placement or a communication or a messaging, right? Which is definitely worth convincing for advertisers or brands who are spending huge loads of dollars on their advertising. To have a more convincing proof, they ran a case study with PepsiCo, obviously one of the biggest beverage brands, and they were able to improve ROI up to 3 times by building direct relationships with the consumers. So PepsiCo is not an e-commerce brand. So like Josh and Brandie were talking about building in interactions and relationships with the users that are landing or the visitors that are landing on the website, PepsiCo was able to improve the ROI of their paid ads up to 3 times, right? That's quite reassuring to know. So, Brandie, where does GA4 fit in this scenario? We have been hearing about Google Analytics 4 and how it is better, or it is good, bad, ugly about GA4, why one should migrate from UA to GA4. So do you think it is important for brands to migrate to GA4 because of this transition, because third-party cookies are going away? So what's your take on this?
There's multiple reasons why you need to migrate to GA4. I think the most pressing one is just the simple fact that universal analytics is going away. Many brands rely on the free version of Google Analytics. So if you are part of that group, it's really not an option anymore that you have to start making that transition. And it's better that you start doing it sooner rather than later, because this summer is when universal analytics will essentially deprecate. There are also other reasons why I think, as far as the future is concerned, GA4 is part of that future. So if you do plan to stay with Google Analytics, you definitely need to get used to the new data model that GA4 has to accommodate for a lot of the changes that are happening in this space. Also, if you are looking towards things like server-side tracking and doing the whole first-party data collection and having more control over your data and being more compliant with privacy regulations, GA4 is a part of that transition, and that is actually like the base for setting up something like server-side tracking if you do intend to stay with Google Analytics.
Right. And like you said, it's like a necessary evil for us. So we have to migrate. There's no other option for us unless you move to another alternative. Yeah, true.
Right.
Great. Thank you, Randy, for that. So we come back to server-side tagging because that was one of the solutions or one of the marquee solutions that Josh and you have been talking about. So what's the buzz about the server-side tagging, and do you think it is applicable for both analytics and marketing platforms, or is it just for the example of Facebook conversion API, which Josh was mentioning? The question is to both of you. You could take turns to answer.
I can start. Server-side tracking and server-side tagging has a lot of benefits, beyond just, it kind of being one of the best solutions for kind of, getting first-party data to these, different platforms. But beyond that, one, it highly speeds up your website because you're not relying on tons of different pixels, right, that are, competing for each other to load on the page. It gives you a lot more control over the data that you're sending. So as, people are wanting to, have more of an ability to choose what data you send and what data you don't send to different platforms, server side is, a really great solution for that because you can literally customize any type of data you want. And then three, it will give us more accuracy, right? Because, many people have ad blockers. Many people have these things that are automatically on their browser that, block requests, to these different platforms. And server side is all about sending to your own server first before it gets to these different platforms. So we do generally see an improvement of accuracy in terms of the data that's being sent with whatever data you do want to send. So there's a lot of different value to server-side tracking. I'll throw it to you, Brandie, to talk kind of about the difference in analytics and marketing platforms.
Yeah, Brandie.
Right, yeah. Yeah, just to piggyback on what Josh just explained, I mean, I feel like server side is going to be the future for tracking in general. We're at a very critical point in the evolution of web analytics tracking, with all the privacy regulations that have rolled out, not just in the EU, which most people are familiar with the GDPR situation, but now we have that happening in the US with CCPA, CPRA, and other states that are rolling out their initiatives as well that are going to require businesses to understand, number one, what data are you collecting? Who is it going to? What are you doing with it? having all of those things that you're now going to be essentially responsible for, it kind of puts you in a position to have something like this so that you can control what is actually happening with the data. A lot of people don't realize that the pixels that we deploy to the websites, a lot of us don't even actually know what they're doing. Those pixels kind of have free reign. Once you put them on the site, they collect whatever they want. We don't have insight as to what these platforms are doing with said data. So it's putting us in a position to where you really need to know what's happening with this data and where is it going and what's being done with it. And the only way to really control that is to have a server-side solution.
Got it. There is actually a question from the audience that we had collected. So, Josh or Brandie, one of you might answer. Like, since you mentioned that pixels are able to collect data as much they want, so is server side foul proof? So that was the question that had come in.
Say that again.
Is server side foul proof? FOUL foul proof, as in Is it
foolproof? Yes and no. It's not completely foolproof. You do have the ability to kind of customize the data that's coming in, but you really need to configure it in a way that you're relying essentially on whoever is configuring it to know all the rules, know all of the kind of the intricacies of the different data laws that are out there, right? And yes, like hypothetically, if that person is completely knowledgeable about every single thing that is out there in the digital web and what you can and can't do, and exactly each platform's policy, with what they're using the data for, you could argue that server side it gets you really close to it being like complete transparency in terms of what you can and can't do. But there are a lot of different, potential problems along the way that you're going to really need to have probably multiple people's input into in terms of a setup. And that's why something like a CDP can be really valuable, right? Because that is kind of a step in time in terms of organizing the first party data and what is being sent to these different platforms. And it kind of, gives us a really solid backbone in terms of a place to start with what you can collect and ultimately what you're sending out.
Right. Yeah, and I just want to add to that. People have to also remember you still have to respect the consent of the user, even with a server-side implementation. So a lot of people, when server-side conversation first started kind of coming up in the recent years, they looked at it as a way to circumvent the consent. And it's that's not really what it's for. We still have to respect the consent of the user. So if a user opts out, you still have to respect their choice. So I would just say it's not so much about going for a foolproof solution. It's more so about, do you want to continue to have analytics that are reliable, that you can actually use and leverage in your marketing strategy moving forward? Because at the end of the day, the technologies that we're using are evolving. They have a bunch of new features that are rolling out that will impact our ability to track people. So at the end of the day, if you plan to continue to use analytics, this is something that you should be exploring.
Right. Totally, Brandie and Josh. I think that kinds of answers the question. So moving on, so let's get into a little bit of technicalities, Josh. How complex or simple is this approach? And what is your recommended approach for brands or advertisers?
Yeah. So right now, server-side tracking is quite complex. You need somebody who has some really solid technical knowledge, or you need to use a platform that is set up for server-side tracking, right? And it really depends on what resources you have at your company. but it's definitely much more complex than it was before, right? For client-side tracking, you throw a line of code on your page, and all of a sudden Tag Manager is set up. And then when pixels come up, you just throw them in Tag Manager in either custom HTML or templates, and then boom, it's on your website, right? Server side, you have to customize all the data that's coming through, right? And you have to have some technical knowledge on, how these things work together. So for instance, if you're still doing client-side tagging, and then you also are doing server-side tagging, they need to kind of speak to each other. And there's all of these kind of, setup points along the way to make that happen. And then you also need to build a server to collect this data, right? And so right now, that is a complex thing to potentially do, but I do think in the future, because this is going to be the way of the world moving forward, there will be, really streamlined solutions, and we're already seeing them pop up as we talk on this call to Tagmate. But we're already seeing, some, server-side solutions that are much more automated than, kind of the manual way to do it. But it is a much more technical conversation, right? We're really taking kind of a step back from convenience and a step into a more technical conversation, which, to be fair, that's where the industry is headed anyway, because, we're starting to really, need to kind of understand how data is being processed because of all of this privacy conversation and the ethical conversation of what you are and aren't sending, right? And that needs to be part of the conversation. So it's all wrapped up in like, yes, it is more complicated, but it's a complicated conversation, right? And so that needs to be kind of acknowledged and addressed.
Right. And that means I think some of the marketing dollars gets invested back into the MarTech, setups of server sites of the world.
Yeah.
Brandie, so are your clients accepting or resisting this approach because it's technical in nature or it's complex at this point in time? And when do you think is the right time to get started on this?
Yeah, I think like with anything that's new, there's always going to be a slow adoption of it, to be honest. Especially when it's something that is as technical and complex as this whole concept of, consent management and data, and it's already a niche topic anyway. So when you're dealing with businesses where they might not have a lot of data infrastructure or experts in-house and things like that, gonna kind of gloss over it as long as you can until you can't anymore. So it's not just happening with server side. I think there's the slow adoption of GA4. A lot of people are hanging on to the very end. And server side is also the same concept. Like, we are very comfortable with how we have done things for years, and people are slow to embrace change. So I think it's gonna be one of those things that until we can't anymore, we probably will hold on to the old methods as long as we can. But that's at the expense of getting our arms around this now and being prepared for what unfortunately is coming down the pipeline, and that is this huge massive change in the space of analytics. So right now really is the time that you should be getting familiar with it and at least understanding what is happening.
Right. Either upskill yourself or you take help from experts or consultants like yourself. Yeah, makes sense. There's a question from one of the audience that we had noted down. It's a long question, but I'll just shorten it. I think the attendee wants to ask, do we have any issue or any approach to choose server-side tagging setup with GA4? And what kind of web frameworks do they support? Website frameworks, I mean.
You could technically you can implement GA4 with server side on any website. In terms of how you do that, there's multiple different approaches. Generally, the way that I've done it in the past is through Google Tag Manager. Google Tag Manager supports server-side tracking as well, and it kind of interacts with your client side. So basically, you're collecting, kind of the on-site activity, and then instead of sending it directly to GA4, you're sending it to a server, right? Your GTM server, processing that data, and then sending that data out to GA4 through measurement protocol, or the V2, the one that supports GA4 implementation. So there's definitely a lot of different ways that you can achieve this. That's one way of doing it. And what's nice about the GTM one is that, and then most sophisticated kind of server-side implementations is that you have one basis where you're sending all of your data, and then you can use that data. And this is, I saw that there was a question in chat surrounding kind of site performance, and this is one of the reasons that it speeds up your site so much. Is you can take a single tag, right, and based from your browser side, send all the data into it, and then on your server, that's where you're collecting the data, and then you can send that out to multiple different platforms, right? And so that essentially negates the need for all of these different pixels on your website. And, I don't have direct data right now to say, this is how much it speeds up your site, but there's a lot of pixels in JavaScript on your site that are competing from each other, right? From a pixel perspective. And taking a lot of that away will definitely load your site a lot faster, right? So, there's definitely, the one, good thing about pushing that data through is you start with GA4, and as Brandie was talking about this before, you start with GA4 as a baseline for getting this data in there, and then you can leverage the same data that you're sending to your server to send out to other platforms such as Facebook and Snap and the different API endpoints. So essentially, you're building, a data lake almost to these different platforms where you're structuring your data on your server, starting with GA4 and then sending out to the different platforms.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Josh. And since you mentioned about certain data points around the page load time, here is a stat that I wanted to follow up. This is again, I think, a Google case study by Google, where they did it with a Scandinavian retailer, and namely, they say that when they did server-side tagging for their ad conversions, along with the consent mode implementation, they were able to increase the conversions, which is like almost like an ROI, by 40% more. And like we were talking about the page load time, it improved by 7%. That's definitely very pivotal for SEO purpose and, as usual, like for the user experience, right? Great. I think we had almost done with the Q&A session with our speakers, but there's another section of audience Q&A, and I'll come back to that later with more questions. For a brief period, I will talk about the Tagmate and what this product is all about. In short, when we think website implementation of analytics or marketing, we look at our developers or we look at our analysts, right? So we say that, so here today we are saying that there is a no-code or a low-code application where you don't have to be dependent on your developers. You don't have to worry about the platform or the framework. Like it can be Shopify, it can be WordPress, and you can still collect first-party data for your GA4, Google Ads, Facebook Ads, and other platforms that you operate with, right? And this is all in almost no time, so that you are able to save up to 80% of your time and your costs of hiring consultants and hiring agencies to or freelancers to get the job done, right? So you can explore us at www.tagmate.app, where you can have a check at the website, and you can sign up for a free trial to get a better understanding of how this no-code automation tool performs. Just to give another preview of it, so on the left-hand side, there are different types of pre-built templates. Like if you want to track add to cart for your Shopify website, or you want to track scroll tracking or a form submission on your website, all these are ready-made templates which are available within Tagmate, which you just need to configure them with a couple of user or very natural language based functions or fields, and you are just done. You don't have to worry about the back end part of it, which is tags, triggers, variables in within your GTM, and you are good to go with the data collected in GA4 or Universal Analytics, right? And as we have been talking about server side, so we also have the Tagmate also has a function or a feature where we are allowing no code based server side setup. So which might take multiple days from connecting your servers, connecting your Facebook event manager account or your ads accounts, your Google Tag Manager accounts, and creating the pipelines and everything. All that configuration gets automated really quick so that you get everything done in less than an hour with Tagmate. So if you're interested, we would urge you to come back and look at the website at www.tagmate.app. Right? Great. Yeah, so one of the questions, will the slides be shared afterwards? Yes, Michael will be sharing it. Don't worry. The video will be live on our YouTube channel, so you can always check and, recording and all of that. Yeah, so Josh, I think, answered the question on SST affecting the website performance. I'll move to the second question. Maybe Brandie, if you can answer us. How will the cookieless environment impact tracking of multicultural audiences?
That's a great question. I think it's more of a broader impact just across the board. Like right now, a lot of people don't really understand how platforms are able to build profiles of people. So when we have things like you're leveraging Meta or you're on Google and they have these audiences that fall into these certain buckets that have these attributes that are we're assigning these attributes to these people and saying, hey, this person, is interested in this and this other person is interested in that, and they live here and the next person lives there. All of that stuff has been reliant on third-party cookies. They're sending data from other, they come to your website, that data is being sent back to Facebook, and they're building the profile of this person. So when they can no longer do that, that automatically makes it harder for a platform that you're advertising on to say, well, this person may be interested in what you're advertising for. So in the past, like I said, this is something that we've just grown accustomed to leveraging. It's part of everyone's marketing mix, anyone who's advertising online at least. So again, when we can't build those profiles of people as easily, that is where a lot of the, things shift as far as like your cost per lead goes up, because you can't exactly target the person that you were able to target last year because we don't have as much data on that person. So these platforms are seeing a huge shift in how accurate their targeting mechanisms are because that data is just not there anymore. A lot of people, you've probably done it too, gotten those pop-ups on your phone, to opt out of tracking, and you don't want to be cross-site tracked or anything like that. And whenever we opt into things like that, it just makes it harder for targeting to work, to be honest.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. On an SST bit, I think, Josh, how much additional data is collected after SST implementation, and any data on this?
It's an interesting question because there's if we're talking about purely like event data that is going out to the different platforms, there's like a pretty significant increase of like the amount of events that are reaching the endpoint, right? because essentially, again, you're not relying on client side, which has blockers, which can be, restrict essentially like those events coming from the pixel directly. But the question is phrased, how much additional data is there, right? And it's a really interesting question because you have control of the data that is being sent there, right? And so that, is really important to note that you might send less data, to the system. So it really just depends on your setup.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. I think right from the browser related info to email ID, phone number, whatever the conversion API implementation happens to consider, I think those kind of data gets collected, right? Yeah. There's one last question before we end. Maybe Josh or Brandie, you can answer. Where and how do you set up a GTM server? And what are the best suggestions, tools, services, or practices?
I could start just with saying, like, so if you have if you are a user that is looking to build this on Google, the Marketing Cloud is where you would start, and you could build your instance there. I've heard that there's some exploration depending on like how complex your data infrastructure is. People are trying to build servers on other platforms for security reasons, but I will kind of defer to Josh as far as the technical intricacies are concerned. But there's a number of ways that you can do it. There are partners. Tagmate is one of those options to build a server-side tracking solution. There's different ways that you can do this. I think it just boils down to how complex is your data strategy and what type of data are you looking to collect. That will determine like how intricate those details would actually be.
Yeah, I think there's right now what we see is it's relatively complicated right now, and there's some good solutions like Tagmate that help simplify it, right? But in terms of the future, it really depends. Like some websites will have built-in server side, right? Shopify is going to probably build that. In terms of WordPress is probably going to have plugins that do server side, right? But you won't have a lot of control if you go through that, right? Because it's not built to give you control. It's built to send the data out to the platforms, and it'll just kind of blanket do that, right? And so something like Tagmate or GTM server side, which you're going to be building essentially through Google Cloud Platform, right? That gives you the ultimate ability to kind of structure the data that is going in or out, right? And so, it's going to be important in the future to have some kind of solution that you can customize, because there are going to be different privacy laws from regions, right? And that is going to make it very complicated to have just a blanket, this is my setup, right? It needs to be able to be adaptable and scalable and be able to change, right? So, it's just really important to, kind of understand the technical aspects of this and set it up in a way that is flexible enough for the future of advertising.
Absolutely. And thanks, Josh, for that. I think I've got a feature request from you. So I'll ask my product team to work on it to make it more customizable for all kinds of audiences, right? There's a question, I think, from Karina. Is there any easy way to do server-side tagging? Yes. We will share handouts right at the top of the email, and maybe you could read about Tagmate, and also there will be links to Google, documentations. So maybe you can start with an initial understanding of that and move forward as we go along, right? Great. I think that's. If there are more questions, I'm sorry, we'll have to kind of drop off. Okay, there's one last question. I'll just take it. To which other APIs beside Google Analytics, Facebook API, and Google Ads can an integration be done? So I think what the user is mentioning is maybe apart from GA, Google Ads, and Facebook API, what other APIs are available for integrations via server side? So would one of you would want to answer that?
Sure. Happy to. Right now, there is. We already mentioned Google Analytics, Facebook. Snap has a conversion API endpoint. Twitter has a conversion API endpoint. We're going to see more and more and more build them out. So, like, regardless of if they have them now or not, the future is that they will have. Right, they will have them because there is no alternative solution right now that is going to work without it. Right, so it's whatever you set up now. Again, as more platforms start supporting server side, you can just hopefully piggyback on your already existing infrastructure to build those platforms into the existing infrastructure. Right, so you'll see it'll be a fun new future of server-side tagging.
Right. Just like your agency's name, From the Future.
Right, exactly. Shameless plug.
Brandie, any closing thoughts from your end on first-party data, cookieless, and maybe an one-liner experience on the webinar?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just leave everyone with the thought of, don't shy away from this. I know it can be very intimidating, especially if you're not a data person, and this is something that is very, very technical. It can be intimidating to have this conversation, but if you're here and you're participating in this discussion, you've already taken a step to solve this problem. So I would say the more information that you gather, the more exploring and research that you do, the better it will be for you in the long run. Just don't avoid it, because I feel like those who choose to avoid it, they're going to be the ones that are going to have a really tough time in the coming years, especially with so many things going away and so many strategies that are going to become obsolete. So whatever you do, just don't avoid it. Embrace it.
Right. Like Steve Jobs says, stay hungry and stay foolish. So as more and more opportunities come by, I think we just need to upskill and work basically monitor strategies accordingly. Great. Thank you again, Josh and Brandie, for such a brilliant Q&A session with me. I think the audience definitely would have something to in their brains or in their minds once they leave the webinar. And please feel free to reach out on our emails if there are certain questions that are pointed towards the experts. We'll reach out to them and definitely help you with more and more answers or more and more queries on and also resources or documentation that is available with us. Right. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Brandie, for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bismay.
Thank you. And thank you, audience, for being a brilliant audience. Although there's no option to speak, but then you have riddled us with a lot of questions, both from the form that we had shared in our initial emails, as well as the Q&A that chat that we had available on the meeting link. Right. So yeah. Thank you, everybody, again. You guys have a nice day ahead, and yeah. Let's get into action on our first-party data strategies.